Hi, I'm Matt from InMobi's marketing team. We have a special guest here today. Jonathan, can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me, guys. My name is Jonathan K. I'm the founder of Apptopia.
Hey, and can you tell us a little bit about Apptopia?
Of course, yeah. So we're essentially a mobile app market intelligence firm, which essentially means that today we can give you a pretty strong insight into how many downloads, how much revenue, how much usage any app in the ecosystem is getting. And so we're a competitive intelligence tool for most mobile brands today.
Great. And I'm curious, what are the kind of companies now that you're working with? Who are the brands that are really focused on their app businesses right now?
Yep. Yeah, so I think kind of like one of the biggest shifts that we've seen is we've started to get a lot of additional interest from like the food space, which is not only like quick serve restaurants like McDonald's, but huge amount of pop-ups around like food delivery. So we've started to work with huge amount of like food delivery companies internationally, and given that it requires local infrastructure, there's a different Grubhub in every international region. So we started to do a lot of work with them and retail.
There's been some consolidation in the food delivery space here in the US. Is that the sign of things to come? Are we going to see a consolidation of options?
Yeah, I mean, like, right, there's only so many cars on the road and like so many people delivering to so many places. At some point, even if you think about the like Joe's Pizza shop around the corner, like, is it really economical for that one person to drive their one car just to deliver that only that restaurant? Not really, right? And so like businesses that are so heavily infrastructure driven are ripe for consolidation, which is I think why you saw the Caviar acquisition, and you'll probably see a lot more internationally as well, because where let's say Lyft decides they want to compete with Uber Eats, like there's existing infrastructure, right? Like they should go in and acquire that and then improve it and make it their own.
So of those businesses that are currently offering food delivery, how do you differentiate yourself in such a crowded market?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the big play that these guys are making right now is they're trying to sign exclusives with certain brands. So I'm not sure if you like read about what was happening with McDonald's, but I believe McDonald's was actually exclusively on Uber Eats, which was a huge thing for Uber. They've pulled out of that. I can't share exactly why, but I would lean toward the fact that like there's different platforms that have different audiences, and once you've saturated a certain audience, you need to like work with other partners that can help you get into different audiences. But at least in food delivery, they're trying to differentiate themselves through like pricing breaks and exclusive restaurants. Because sometimes you're like, hey, I really want to eat at Taco Bell or Sweet Green or whatever it is, right? And like you go to the tool that allows you to like get what you want. And so I think content in a lot of ways, which in this case is food, is going to be the driver of the differentiators.
It's funny, I don't think I would have ever thought, well, I have to use Uber Eats because that's the only way I can get my Big Mac, but maybe I'm a little different than other people.
Maybe you've just not craved a Big Mac at the level that other people, that like the average American does. But
fair enough.
It's a real thing.
Yeah, it's sort of, but then that puts, I would imagine, the food delivery companies in a tough spot because you're so reliant on the Taco Bells and the McDonald's and the Sweet Greens of the world to differentiate yourself. Like that's such a hard position to be in, because if I'm McDonald's, if I'm saying how much money Uber Eats is making off me, why wouldn't I just go into that business myself?
Yeah, it's fair. My instinct tells me that like there's some deal you get with being an exclusive. So maybe it's like in Uber Eats, they like feature content to you, right? And so like just like on the App Store, like you want to get featured by Apple. I think restaurants want to get pushed up to the top of the chain. And so I think what happens on Uber Eats, well, it's like eventually a marketplace, dude. It's no different than the App Store, right? It's just like a food App Store. The one thing that I did like that Uber Eats did is they offer a Uber Eats Pass now. So a subscription. So I actually subscribe to Uber Eats. I'm like so not trying to promote this, but like you don't pay any fees if you pay like $10 a month. So for like degenerates like me that order out 5, 6, 7 times, 8 times a month, like it's like pays for itself in like a week.
It's interesting. It's using the built-in audience of one app to promote your brand.
And then I want to stick it to Uber, right? Like, so now I end up ordering more from there because I want to get the value of my $10 that I'm giving them. It's all psychology, right? Like this is like a huge This is psychology, right?
Right.
Game theory for sure.
And it's so hard for the food delivery apps if you're focused so much on pricing, and it becomes an Amazon play where everything just gets pushed to the bottom and only the strong survive.
Yeah. I think there's too much optionality today. It has to go down to a couple.
It's interesting that Uber is in this space that Lyft isn't, because in some respects they're very much going head to head in other components of transportation. And it's interesting because it's one of the things that we've seen historically from our markets in APAC is this idea of the super app. So this is especially the case in China, where it's not lots of apps that you use for different things, but everything is within like a WeChat, for example. And I'm curious, we haven't quite seen that. Certainly Facebook has tried, Uber has tried. Do you see that model actually coming to the United States?
A little bit. So I'll tell you something cool that Lyft did recently. So Lyft essentially incorporated public transit APIs into their app. So now when you open up Lyft, not only will it show you like the options for your Lyft ride, but it shows you how close, like the closest public transportation. And I was talking to them trying to understand, like, why did you do that? Like, are you trying to like anchor me to actually buy a Lyft ride? Like, what are you trying to do? And their logic was like, we just want you in the Lyft app more. If you're going to take public transportation, you're going to take public transportation, but we'd rather you view us as that like source of primary information. And I was like, that makes a ton of sense. Like, I completely get that and I respect that. And like, I might open the app now for that source of information because it's structured, I'm comfortable with the UI, right? It's reliable, etc. So China's extreme in that regard, but I mean, as a consumer, like, I'm kind of all for it, right? Like, it makes my life easier. I don't have to create another account to use Uber Eats. It's so easy.
Right. In that way, and it sort of presents an interesting situation then, because if I am let's take quick service restaurants, for example. So you talked about McDonald's and Taco Bell. If I'm McDonald's, do I look at the app market now and say, you know what, I think there's an opportunity for me to have my own app and my own branding out there? Or do I try to leverage the apps that are already in existence to boost my brand? And I think direct to consumer is a really interesting example.
Yeah.
Right? So Dollar Shave Club has their own app, but a brand like a Rothy's basically is using Instagram as their app. So how do you determine if the app route is actually right for you?
Yeah, so I think that as long as you have the infrastructure, you have to do both, because there are things that like McDonald's can do and does do through their app that they can't do through Uber Eats, right? And so like essentially if you look over the last 12 months, you'll see that Wendy's, Burger King, McDonald's, Chipotle just had a huge shift in, actually, let's just talk about Chipotle for a second. So Chipotle essentially just like launched this huge rewards platform about 3 or 4 months ago. And we do a lot of work with hedge funds, and like you would see their stock, like they crushed earnings. And it's mostly because by offering a rewards program, they had a huge amount of active users, and like tens or hundreds of thousands start to engage with and maintain their app because the rewards were like meaningful enough for them. And so I think at the end of the day, like we can't forget that like free food is the biggest driver, right? I mean, like here we are in your office and like there's a ton of free food here, right? We offer a ton of free food to our employees because it's like the cheapest, largest impact thing, right? And so at the end of the day, the direct to consumer app allows you to control the messaging to your customer. And so you kind of have like controlled messaging where you can get your hyper like loyal users and you can maintain them and like continue to monetize them. But you need to work with like the Grubhubs of the world because you need distribution channels outside of just direct, right? Now the question is, how do you transfer a user from one to the other? I don't know the answer to that, but I think by not doing both, you're probably like leaving money on the table.
You can leverage the existing brand and audience that comes with an app like a Facebook or a Grubhub, a Seamless, and also use your own app to nurture your own audience as your recommendation.
For sure. I just think there's different like types of customers, right? Like even with your platform, you probably have advertisers that like you talk to on a daily, weekly basis, and then you have advertisers that you work with for years, but they come in maybe monthly, right? You have like different types of customers and they require different types of engagement and treatment. And I think the food space is no different, right? You have your loyalists and they will have your app and you want to maintain a direct line of communication with them. But the market is so huge, you need other distribution channels, right? And so these third-party apps offer that in spades, you know?
Sure. I think that you brought up a point about the own app, specifically with how Chipotle uses rewards. Do you see rewards as the main driver for getting someone to your own app if you're a restaurant?
I think so, right? And like I think we can say rewards and free food at this point are like synonymous, but like essentially, let's take Burger King as an example, another example. So Burger King at the end of 2018 started to run ad campaigns where they offered a free burger if you downloaded their app. I don't know what like Burger King's cost for a burger is, but like probably single digit cents, right? And so they added about like 300,000 to 400,000 new users at the end of the year to their app, which is substantial as a result of that. And we did some math and like essentially like 4 months after the promotion, they maintained like over 80 to 90,000 of the users. So there was like a bunch of users that just like wanted a burger and that was that. But there was also like, that's a lot of people who after 3 or 4 months maintained the Burger King app on their phone. And now whatever that cost them, like $50,000 in burgers, they now have these users that they can directly engage with. And so, I mean, I think in cities and suburbia, it might be a little different, but like, I've seen no evidence that free food and rewards is not like continued motivation for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess then it begs the question, how do you determine what incentive is enough to turn someone, to make them actually download your app and use it on a regular basis versus becoming yet another transactional customer? How do you figure that out?
Endless testing. There's absolutely no answer. There's no answer. Like, we have no idea. I mean, you and I are like pretty educated people. Hopefully that's why we're sitting on this couch, right? There's some bar we like somehow superseded it, and the truth is that there's no way to know. It's different in every city, in every country, for every different type of food. And anyone who tells you that they know the answer is probably lying or overconfident. And like, you run a test, you test 10 different price points. Like, you see what works, what motivates people, and you probably test that in a small market. And then you go national with the one that worked the best.
If I'm Chipotle, I offer a free burrito, free guacamole, free soda, maybe 2 free burritos, and then you just figure it out.
And like in the world we live in today, where you can do such hyper local granular targeting, there's so many tools for these guys to run like really specific campaigns just in like Palo Alto, or just in like one small region where they can like test these things on a small scale, so that when they go national or internationally with the campaign, they're like pretty confident that they found the right formula.
And that's the benefit of doing all of this within a mobile, specifically a mobile app environment, is that you can have a much deeper understanding of someone that you probably aren't going to get even from a mobile website.
Well, and just like the cost of getting information, right? We're essentially talking about like, how do you collect information that you need to be successful, to run a good marketing campaign, a good UA campaign? And mobile allows you to collect an unbelievable amount of detailed data, not like privacy data, but like data about like what works, right? Like, you're poking someone, like how do they react, right?
Right.
And you can get that really quickly, in weeks, right? Whereas like, imagine you have to make a change to your website, or you have to push out a billboard, or you have to run something out in stores. I mean, like, it's 6 months and like you may or may not have the data yet, right?
Sure. So I think one thing, we're talking a lot about very established, very well-known brands. If I'm a newer entrant to the market, say I'm a brand new salad chain, for example, how do you ensure that you get both awareness in a sufficient scale to go along with any kind of user acquisition app download campaign?
Yeah, it's a big question. What I would say is that like, first thing you need to do is kind of identify like who your audience is. And it sounds like a really stupid comment because like, you're a salad chain. You're looking for like people who like health food, right? Great, you know your audience. Like that would be what someone who's uneducated would say. But the truth is that your audience on mobile might be different than your audience who's like walking down the street. And you know that they're interested in healthy things, but what other things do they do? Are they runners? Because if they're runners, you can have a partnership with Strava, or you can have a partnership with Map My Run, and you can actually start to like run like really targeted ads that block out your competitor in certain apps that like are relevant, but like might not be directly relevant. Maybe you find out that like actually people who are interested in your salad chain are, they're like puzzle geeks. So like you actually want to run ads inside puzzle games and Tetris and like all these different places, and like actually that has a huge high correlation because high conversion rate, because there's a correlation between these activities. And so on mobile, it's about figuring out like where is your audience that is not just in the most obvious places, and then like using ad networks and platforms to help you like target those users in those hyper local places. Other things I would advise is like, we've seen that in terms of like ad creatives. So we do a lot of work with ad creatives around like helping people understand what works. Two biggest things we've seen are like, one, just like transparency. So like sometimes we see these like hugely produced ads. Like it's not super relevant for salad, but like if you look at all the Game of Thrones apps that come out and you look at the ads, like the mobile ads that are running with Game of Thrones, dude, it's like you're watching the movie. It's like Daenerys is like in like 4K HD on your phone, but then you download the app and it's like playing StarCraft. You know what I mean? It's like old school graphics. And that's like a huge letdown for the user, because you showed them this like hyper visual thing. You got them really pumped up about that. Then they downloaded the app, which is great because that's what you want. But you've set such a wrong expectation, and now they're like in your game, in your store, and like it's not actually the truth, right? And so you need to be careful on mobile advertising to set the right expectation, because you could do a lot of work, spend a lot of money, get a lot of downloads, and then have really shitty retention. And it doesn't matter because you've set the wrong expectation.
Yeah, it's not enough to get someone to download your app. You want someone who's actively engaged and is a quality user. It doesn't make sense for you to spend money to acquire downloads if none of those downloads are repeat business or using your app or any value to you.
I think this is like a huge misconception. Like we see lots of ads today also for games where there's some like very beautiful woman playing the game and it like catches your attention. But like then I've watched the whole 30-second ad and like I still don't know what the game does. So maybe I watch the ad, but like I have no idea what your app actually or your game does. And so we've seen a lot of like misses in mobile where they're like might be attention grabbing, but they're not actually like transparent. And so it's a tough balance, right? Like you have to like bring them in, but you have to give them enough information that there's like an agreement between you and the user that like you understand what you're getting when you download the app.
Yeah, and I think that is so hard to manage because we see so many ads in every component of our life, right? Billboards, TV ads, desktop ads, mobile ads. You have to be so thoughtful about how you cut through the clutter and really make an impact. So I definitely see the impulse to have these very eye-catching, splashy ads. And there's a concern, I think, if let's say I'm advertising the Chipotle app, if I'm just saying, download the app to make ordering burritos easier, is that really enough? I can see the impulse to go the opposite direction, to do something more akin to what's traditionally seen, say, in TV advertising.
Yeah.
So how do you, and maybe there isn't a way to balance that. Maybe there's nothing that we can say that'll say, you need to do this while also doing this for every single mobile ad that you run.
Yeah, listen, I think like it depends on the type of company. So with Chipotle, they probably have brand dollars and user acquisition dollars, right? So like the ad of like the farmers who are like smelling the fresh produce that makes the really healthy stuff that you get at Chipotle, like that's not meant to spark action. It's meant to just remind you that Chipotle exists. It's a branding ad. And there's no like KPI tied to that other than like staying top of mind. But then if you're running a mobile campaign, like some mobile is branding, but at the end of the day, you're so close to taking an action. Like they just literally click and then the app is on their phone. That, at least from our world, we work with people that are more tied to like UA, like there's $1 ROI that they need to get on the money that they're spending on ads, in which case, just keep in mind, don't run a brand ad on mobile and expect a user acquisition action. So I think it's about like having the correct ads and the correct KPIs tied to those ads, right?
It's just having the right conceptions in mind of, if I'm running this ad, this is what I want to see from it, and this is how I'm going to measure success.
For sure. And like going back to the Game of Thrones example, like maybe it's shame on me because maybe the ads that I'm critiquing were chalked up as brand ads, right? But it's just a matter of like having the right expectations.
And I think maybe that's also a component of mobile in-app advertising that's really key, is that there is so much that you can do from a performance and app download perspective that you can't do in any other format. And maybe that's just key for advertisers to keep in mind, is that they have these options within mobile in-app advertising that don't exist anywhere.
Yep. And one other thing that I would say is that I think one of the bigger misconceptions today, or not misconceptions, but like misses in mobile, is people who rely heavily on audio. So I'll speak for just myself at the moment, but like at least in some of the data that we see as well, like audio doesn't really land. Like if I'm scrolling through Instagram or I'm like playing a game and like an ad pops up, I don't want like a huge glaring sound, right? Like I might be on like the subway or the bar and like maybe I have my headphones in, maybe I don't like want to deal with the audio. And so the ads that we've seen perform really well, they might have audio, but they actually have text scroll on the screen, which mimics the audio. And so it allows somebody to like make sense of what the ad is and what you're trying to communicate. So if there's no audio, they might just scroll past it because they have no idea what it is. If the audio starts blaring, I immediately like get out of the app because I'm like either making a scene or it's just annoying, right? But sometimes like it'll catch me and I'll actually catch myself reading the text. And so some of the ads we've seen perform really well. Skills has done good ones. Wordscapes has done really good ones. They have text that like moves pretty quickly on the screen. And it almost feels like a challenge to me that I have to like read what it is because it's moving pretty quickly. And then you end up consuming the message anyway, right? And so I think just knowing that like different people will consume your ads in different ways and providing different ways that people can get the message, if they're listening, if they're not listening, if they're just watching, I think is really important to make sure that you get the most impact for your spend.
Yeah, and certainly we've seen advertising that includes rich media, that includes interactivity.
Yes.
Think about just how ubiquitous the swipe up feature has now become within the mobile app experience. You know, those kinds of components that you can do within mobile apps that you certainly can't do in traditional TV advertising. I think there's a lot of opportunity for advertisers to make the most of those kind of experiences that we don't necessarily see all the time. So one thing I want to talk about, I want to go back to kind of an app user acquisition point. So I think when we're thinking about like a food delivery app or an app like a Chipotle, so these are companies that certainly have the possibility for an often repeat user. What about brands that are much more transactional in nature? So I'll take car buying, I think, is a good example. You're only going to buy a car maybe once every 3 to 5 years at most. How does, say, a Ford or a Chevy or a Mitsubishi, how do apps figure into their branding? And does it make sense for more transactional companies to even bother having their own app?
Dude, that's a good one. I like that. So listen, I am of the mindset that like it makes sense for everyone to have an app, because at the end of the day, like having your brand on my mobile device is the single best placement for your brand in any way, shape, or form. And so I think it's about thinking about like at the end of the day, is there some ongoing value you can provide to the user? So what you've seen is that the Ford and the Chevy apps like now allow you to like do things inside of the car. So like they maintain access to their users by not only letting you like browse cars or like find car dealerships or do something around the transaction, but they give you some convenience that happens after the transaction as well, which creates some like relevancy for you to maintain their brand. Other things we've seen is for apps like maybe like a Carvana or a Car Gurus, which is not like entirely different than like a Kayak or Expedia or Skyscanner, where it's all transaction based. They've started to do a lot of work with alerts, which I think has been really cool. So if you're booking a flight, you subscribe to get an alert. They'll notify you via push messaging anytime your like flight is less expensive. Maybe you're buying a used car. You want to know if other cars come up, or you're searching for specific cars. You can put like a feeler out there. So there's a reason for you to keep it, because maybe you're not proactively going into the app. But I love apps that like provide value to me without me ever having to open them. Like I just know it's there. They're kind of looking out for something for me. Okay, I'll keep it. That's valuable, right? One thing I always kind of wished would happen, and this doesn't exist today, but I have a Honda, okay? I know that they want to buy back cars. And so I would totally keep the Honda app on my phone if like they could send me offers to buy back my car, and like I got some exclusive offer to buy back my car, which they want to do anyway. They already know all the information about my car, and I can only get those through mobile. This would be amazing, right? Like it's total motivation for me to keep the app. And so I think these transactional companies need to do better about like alerts and offers, because like my fear of missing out is high, and I will keep an app on my phone for sure if I feel like I'm not missing out on something.
Honda, if you're listening, a potential great idea for you. Yeah, I think that's interesting. There's so many ways in which someone can interact with an app on their phone. It's just a matter of figuring out, as a brand, what's right for my customers, whether they're in the planning phase, whether they've already made a purchase, or whether maybe they're a former customer and I'm trying to win them back. Apps can play a role in that there's a wide variety of ways to think about an app versus maybe necessarily what's the most common options out there.
Yep, completely agree.
So one thing I think I know has come up is, especially with individuals with older phones, you are limited in the amount of space. Do you think that's enough of a barrier for brands to maybe consider other options besides an app? Or are apps still powerful enough that you should still push it despite device limitations?
So device limitations is a real issue. And so we typically advise clients to design their apps in a way that is as light as possible. And so like maybe instead of hosting a bunch of content directly in the app, you host it in a CDN. Or like you don't have a million SDKs installed inside your app. You like test the ones that work and you keep the SDKs that are relevant. But like we've seen file size of apps have like a pretty large impact on like engagement with customers. I mean, in games, like if you can't download it on a mobile network, you've cut 50% of your downloads out right out the gate, right? And yeah, it's true. Like if you have a Ford app on your phone that was taking up a bunch of space, you run out of space. That's pretty quick on the chopping block. And so I think it's a matter of like brands figuring out how to build experiences in the mobile app that are like pretty much UI only, not like a ton of content, or if there's a ton of content, like hosted in a CDN so that the app is really, really light. I just think you need to know who you are, right? Like if you're a brand, you're on the chopping block, like build a really lightweight, speedy app and like invest time into that. So I think you can get around that. So I would still suggest mobile app, but I think you need to like be honest with yourself around where you sit on the priority list on the mobile device, and you need to like make some product decisions accordingly.
And maybe also make sure that you're providing so much value to your consumer that they're never going to get rid of it. Like I think especially here in San Francisco, you're never going to get rid of Uber or Lyft because it's become such an integral part to how people in San Francisco get around. And it's just a matter of making sure that your app is valuable enough that it's a must-have, not a nice-to-have.
Completely agree.
So I want to go back to we've touched on different components of user acquisition. I would say overall, regardless of the type of app, what are the main things that you think apps need to absolutely adhere to, keep in mind whenever they're running a user acquisition campaign?
Yeah, so like most obvious one is however many ad creatives you think you need to build, you probably need to build 10 times as many as you think. Because we talked to like some of the most successful advertisers in the world, and their single best creative sometimes perform for like 2 days. It's the single best performing creative, but for some reason it works for like 2 days, a week, 3 days, whatever it is. And so you need to have a lot of optionality, because the second that people get used to seeing something, they'll stop consuming it. They'll be like, okay, I've already seen this one. Like at this point, I've seen so many Gardenscape ads that I just like refuse to watch them anymore. But like they actually do a pretty good job around like pushing out a bunch of different types of content on ads, and like so like every 4 or 5 I see something new, and so I'm like my brain knows that it's something new, and so like I think the volume of creatives that you need to design is way more than you think, and I think the really big publishers know this. We've seen smaller publishers like optimize their team by hiring like 4 UA people and 1 designer. And I think it should be split. Like 1 or 2 really sharp people can allocate the money, especially given the resources that like networks like you guys offer today. But like hire more design resources. It will be the single biggest bottleneck of your success. That would be like my first kind of pillar. Second pillar would be just like be really clever around who you target and how you target them. So there are always like obvious buckets, but you need to keep in mind that your competitors are probably also playing in the obvious buckets, right? And you have to find the other places that your users spend their time and their money, and you need to target them in places that might like require like two steps, you know what I mean? But if you do the research and you get the data and you figure out where your users are spending their time, like be a little bit creative around in what forums you target them and what other types of apps, because you might be like the only puzzle app running ads inside a health and fitness app because you figured out that correlation, whereas inside like a role-playing game, there's like 75 different puzzle apps advertising. It's really, really hard for you to stand out.
Yeah, there's this concept that we've talked about here, which is you are your top apps. So there's certain apps, everyone has the big social media apps, everyone has Gmail on their phone. You're not going to differentiate yourself by being on those channels. Maybe you have to run campaigns there because the reach is just too big to ignore. But, you know, if you think about the apps where you have the most brand loyalty, it might be your running apps. Maybe it's a very specific game where you've developed a community, and often there's overlap between these app audiences that aren't obvious, and that's where the data is going to tell you the full story.
Yep. And like other things that we've seen is like sometimes we'll see, let's say you build like a trivia game, okay? And you're looking at Trivia Crack's data because you want to like learn from Trivia Crack. And you see that in Denmark or Argentina, they like actually have a super high average revenue per user relative to like the United States or the UK or the Australia, where the cost to advertise is actually higher than in like a smaller country like a Denmark or Argentina or Spain. Well, there's an opportunity there for you. There's like an ROI opportunity, right? Because they're making more money, but the cost to advertise there is actually less. And so like what we always say is that like find people on, like allocate people's time on your team to run a bunch of smaller campaigns, because while the market size for trivia games in Argentina might not be massive, there is an opportunity there. And if you run a bunch of micro campaigns, you can, and like they're data driven, you can actually start to have on a large scale your UA campaigns be way more effective than your competitors. But it like some of these players like a Rovio or an EA, they need to allocate such huge amounts of money that like they don't have the opportunity to really capitalize on these like Argentinian opportunities. I'm just making this example up. But if you're a mid-sized developer, like you can win by like being really clever and doing a lot of campaigns in a lot of different niche sectors, countries, and categories that can actually like help your overall ROI of your campaign pretty dramatically.
And then it becomes a matter of, do you have access to the right data, and do you have the resources to analyze that data?
Correct. But like my hypothesis, at least from what we've seen, is that like the campaign can be so much more effective by doing that it will more than pay for the resources you need to do it. It's just a matter of like hiring the right people who know how to like instrument these things and like know how to work with the data, etc.
I get one thing though, with GDPR in Europe, with the CCPA about to pass here in California, some of the data that maybe advertisers were used to having, is now you have to think of that very differently. How do these privacy initiatives play into what advertisers look at, and how do you use data while also respecting user privacy?
Yeah, so I think like the big shift is like you'll be able to buy less bulks of device IDs, right? So like previously you might have been like buying actual device IDs from various different providers where that like these certain apps are on their phone, etc. You'll probably see some of that shift down. At least at like Apptopia, all the data that we provide is at the app level, not at the device level. And like you start to find trends, like what countries there's opportunity in, like what different like cross-app usage looks like in terms of like what people are actually using, where they're spending their time, what other brand affiliations your users have that you might be able to leverage, or like direct partnerships you can negotiate with companies. And so I think it's just a matter of like being creative and like doing a little bit more work to figure out, like digging a little bit deeper. But I think I don't think these things affect the opportunity. They just affect the path you have to take. Is all.
If you look at it from a persona level, there's still potentially insights there that are interesting that you can glean without necessarily saying it's you specifically in this particular location and that you specifically have these apps within this device ID, that there's still opportunities even at a more aggregate level.
Absolutely correct, right? Because you're essentially just like building a persona of like people who play Tetris. Here are the types of things that people who play Tetris like. Well, they also like Scrabble. They also like care about how many calories they eat. I don't know, making things up, right? But like you're building a persona of like what type of people spend their time in certain places. It doesn't have to be Jane or Frank or Susie, but like you're building that persona, and executing on that level will be beneficial.
And then making sure that your creatives, as you mentioned previously, are optimized for each of those audience types.
Absolutely correct, right? Because like the ads you show inside like a calorie counting ad might be hugely different than the ads you show inside, I don't know, like a game, right? And again, that's why like invest in design resources has to be like one of the biggest takeaways, because the more targeted the ads are, it's more work because it's more granular, but it's like much more successful. Even in our business, man, we've seen it. Like this like whole motion of like account-based marketing and like showing really targeted ads to clients. Like when we want to like onboard a new retail client, we send them data on retail. We don't just tell them that we're like a generic app intelligence platform. We're like, no, Target, here's what Walmart's doing. That's how you have a conversation, right? It's no different in the mobile user acquisition space. It's just happening at a larger scale, right?
So do you see a lot of the companies that you're working with use dynamic creatives, or is that an untapped opportunity?
So I think it's an untapped opportunity in the mid-market. I think like the people who are spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars are probably already doing these things. But I think like I mean, dude, this is like my whole vision on the world essentially. Sorry to like philosophize, but like I think the mid-market people today have the resources to do the stuff that the large players are doing, just at a smaller scale. This is like the whole infrastructure, the whole technology, right? Like all the things that you guys are doing, all the cool companies that you've acquired, all the things are providing resources for everyone. Just because I'm spending a little bit less doesn't mean I don't have those resources. And so I strongly urge that people in the tail and the mid-market like spend a little bit of money on data, figure out what the big guys are doing, and just follow suit, right? Like learn from them. Let them spend a bunch of money, make a bunch of mistakes, do a bunch of trial and error, learn from that, and then start to work with like partners that will help them execute those like dynamic or like very granular campaigns. Because even at a mid-level scale, like, dude, it will impact your ROI, and like you need to invest that time.
There's a lot that you can do from an advertising perspective, regardless of your company size, to make an impact with your target market.
Exactly correct. Exactly correct.
So let's switch gears a little bit. We've talked about the people running the ads. Now let's talk about the apps where the ads are actually running. From a monetization perspective, you know, what opportunities are there for apps like a puzzle app or a transit app to effectively monetize without overwhelming their audience or without providing them with a poor user experience?
Yeah, it's so interesting, man. For me, it comes literally down to one thing, and I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but like it's about just like setting the correct expectation with your users. So I'll give you an example. I believe it's Glue's app, like Tap Sports Baseball. These guys show more ads inside their app than any app almost any app I've ever used. But it does not bother me, because there's a very clear value prop between me, in this case as a user of the app, and the app owner, where like I want something and I'm going to watch this ad in order to get what I want, right? So there's like friction. There has to be friction. If there's no friction, there's no monetization. Black and white, right? Like otherwise I'm not paying or like doing anything or giving you my time unless there's some friction. I have to want something that I can't have. So like first off, you have to have an app or a game that like has like some stickiness, some friction. Once there's friction, it's about how you handle that friction point. So maybe the level's over and they want to play again. Maybe you want to open this like chest or this box that has like some currency in it. Or like maybe I've run out of lives and I need to play, I can play again, whatever it is, but there's some friction. And there needs to be like a transparent agreement between you and the user of like, hey, we're going to give you the thing that you want, but you're going to spend 30 seconds and you're going to consume this content. And you're going to watch the whole thing. And then when it's done, you can X out of it and you can continue. And at least from my standpoint, this is where I've seen advertising be used very effectively, because it's a clear agreement that we're entering into. And at the end of the day, like, because I want what happens at the end of the ad, I'm like watching the ad, right? And so it's effective for the advertiser, which essentially ends up making the person who's monetizing more money anyway, because like the ad campaigns are more effective inside their app. Are you buying it? Does it make sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly we've seen, especially on the gaming side, the idea of a rewarded video or similar kind of ad format work well. I think, you know, if you're an app that doesn't have those kind of opportunities, like a non-gaming app, I think there's still opportunities for advertising. I think it's a little bit of a different play. You know, the idea of a publisher offering ads is nothing new, right? There's been advertising in newspapers and magazines for over a century, right? And I think if, as an app publisher, if you're transparent and you say, we want to provide you with a free or a low-cost experience, but as a result, we run ads so that we can pay people to produce content to provide you with a quality experience. And I think if you're upfront as far as why you have ads within your app, and I think if you are, you know, working with high quality advertisers and offering ads in the most valuable and the least obtrusive manner, I think there's still opportunities outside of rewarded within mobile.
Yeah, I mean, like take ESPN and the Weather Channel as two examples. The amount of ads that they show inside their app is absurd. Like I can't even imagine how many impressions they show, but they do it in a very non-obtrusive way. So like you're consuming the weather, you're consuming sports scores, and like they're constantly refreshing banner ads. And like it doesn't bother me because like I'm getting value from their product and it's not getting in my way. I think that if you want to show bigger ads, so like full screen interstitials or video ads, then you're actually taking the user away from the experience of the app. And in that case, you're right that in non-games, it doesn't need to be rewarded, but there still needs to be some agreement between the user, right? Like you're letting me like track my entire run, but at the end of the run, if you want to see the stats on your run, you're going to watch this video, and then we'll show you the stats. It's not rewarded, but it's like a clear proposition that like I've given you some value. And then if you want this next level of value, like, or experience or data or analytics, whatever it is, like, you're going to watch something. And so I think in non-games, there needs to be persistent advertising, which is non-obtrusive, or the larger, more obtrusive ads need to be tied to like some clear value that you've already provided the user inside the app.
Yeah, and I think of, when you're talking about this, I think of YouTube, with the pre-roll 6-second ad. Because basically, I think YouTube has been really smart in saying, look, you may not want to watch this ad, but we think you'll have the appetite for 6 seconds of a video before you get to watching what you want to watch. And I think that is a huge opportunity. We actually took a look at our own data, and we saw that the average video ad in the InMobi exchange is now, I believe, 20 seconds. And 30 seconds, 60 seconds was the default for any kind of video ad from the TV era, and it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
And I think you can still have a great impact with video, but maybe they don't have an appetite to watch 60 seconds of your ad, and maybe all you need is 6 seconds to really get your message across.
Yeah, and the other reason, by the way, I completely agree. I think 15 seconds needs to be the new max. And the reason is because when I'm watching a 30-second ad, I actually will stop watching the ad because I know it has to go on for 30 seconds. So I'll actually start to do something else. But like in 10 to 15 seconds, it's like by the time I would have stopped doing something else, the ad is already over and I can continue to do my thing. And so I actually will just engage for the 10 to 15 seconds because it's actually quicker at that point. So I completely agree with you.
And I think that speaks a lot to how people use mobile devices versus other kinds of media, right? If I'm watching a TV show, or even if I'm streaming Netflix on my laptop, I have an appetite for at least 20 to 30 minutes of time that I've devoted to this activity. If I have my mobile device open, maybe I just need to look at the weather for 2 seconds and then close it and go on with my day. The immediacy of mobile and the speed at which we consume content on mobile devices just is a totally different ballgame. And if you're not thinking about the mobile user, then you're going to provide them with a bad user experience with advertising.
Yep, completely agree.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to get in touch, how can they do that?
Yeah, so apptopia.com, or if you think I'm wrong or you disagree or you have questions, I'm just Jon, John at apptopia.com, and you're welcome to reach out directly as well.
Great. Thanks for tuning in.